Joke villains have been a staple of any good comic franchise. From Crazy Quilt to Harmless Tiger Man, it's hard not to get a kick out of purposely silly characters, be they for comic relief or just to have a weak villain for the hero to destroy. But this doesn't mean that joke villains have to stay that way forever. Everybody loves an underdog story after all, and what's more of an underdog story than seeing Stilt Man or Clock King develop and evolve until they're actually cool characters in their own right. Sometimes just seeing a minor villain get a more complex story arc than you'd expect is enough for them to feel way more badass than they were in the first place, because suddenly they have way more of a purpose and place in the universe at large. In franchises where characters are capable of destroying worlds and leveling mountains, sometimes it's just nice to see someone who is supposed to be a weak joke become something way more meaningful, even if they have a dumb name like Typeface, Glob, or Ewan. Hey, that's me! Well, anyway, I'm Ewan, this is What Culture Comics, and here are 10 Harmless Comics villains who became badasses. Number 10, Aniki. Aniki was always an interesting figure, but became significantly more badass after the New 52 reboot, partially due to him losing the martial arts abilities he had, and also due to him having a significantly more interesting feature in the events of Detective Comics' Endgame. Weirdly, taking away Lonnie's enhanced abilities definitely made him feel more badass, as the idea of a powerless character still trying to better the world feels a lot more engaging than someone who is strong enough that there's practically no danger in them getting into fights. Perhaps more importantly, the updated outfit also looks a heck of a lot better too, as the overdramatic red bodysuit is replaced with a far more tactical looking getup, although one that still mercifully keeps the iconic golden mask. For all Aniki may now look like a rejected X-Men design, he also looks more like someone who would actually exist in Gotham as an underground anarchist fighter, instead of someone who looks like he is wearing a red monogram dressing gown outside. Number 9, Ghost. While being a reoccurring villain to the Thunderbolts isn't a bad gig by any means, I mean, they're not an unpopular team, and them generally consisting of reformed villains does make for an interesting angle, it's also not a position for a major supervillain to occupy. This is why Ghost going from taking on the Thunderbolts to taking on Iron Man marks a big step in both his badass levels and in people's awareness of him outside of him being that creepy dude in the grey armor. Ghost would even go on to play fairly crucial roles in both the Stark Disassembled storyline and several regular Iron Man issues prior, which marked the Grey Menace's move to being considered a pretty cool and pretty lethal villain. While the Ghost would go back to being an enemy of the Thunderbolts, he did so with at least a little bit of extra rep behind him, and the hate of Iron Man too, which hey, has to count for something in the supervillain circle. Number 8, Spot. The speed at which the 2012 Daredevil comic manages to take the teleporting supervillain Spot from a regular human villain to the subject of your night terrors is both impressive and incredibly worrying. After being experimented on by a group of criminals, Spot's ability to use the spots in his skin to teleport things is commodified into a way to move drugs and people, by hooking up wires into these spots and using the villain as a human battery, which naturally looks like a pretty awful experience. Things somehow get even more horrific though, as the machine goes haywire and forces Spot to teleport paradoxically into himself, making him into what can only be described as a patchwork quilt of human limbs and regret. That said, any person who previously wanted to mess with the supervillain now categorically would not, which does still count as an increased level of badassery, all gross distorted bodies aside. Number 7, Glob. Winning the award for Best Character with the worst name, Glob manages to have some surprisingly in-depth character development for a villainous knockoff of Swamp Thing. Glob is initially a pretty nondescript villain, big but kind of mindless, mainly used as an excuse to let the Hulk fight someone strong and nothing much else. It's clear that there wasn't much exciting plan for him character-wise, right up until someone realized the potential that the poor Swamp Beast had. Because suddenly, Glob goes through far more than you'd expect from an exceedingly minor character. Blown up into small pieces, then reformed, then kidnapped by the Collector, then recruited by Nick Fury for a paranormal wing of S.H.I.E.L.D. It manages to create some fairly in-depth development for a character that you wouldn't expect anyone would spend time on, and this surprise makes the storylines all the more interesting. Number 6, Clock King. For anyone who hasn't seen Clock King in the comics before, here's all you need to know. First, he wore some clock-covered spandex, then he wore a weird clock mask that didn't even look like a clock, and then he looked like the unholy and complicated offspring of the Mad Hatter, the Riddler, and Ted Bundy. This is why his New 52 reboot makes itself far simpler, as it saw the role of Clock King be instead taken by William Tachman, who looks like a librarian with a sweet clock face tattoo. And instead of actually fighting, he instead lays traps like the DC Universe's answer to Saw. He's not badass in the way he can fight, or that he has a cool power, but then he doesn't need those things to be just a little bit more badass than his previous counterpart. Number 5, Kingmaker. The Kingmaker is a weird example of a villain who became badass because he was redesigned drastically 3 times, and only managed to become badass in his 3rd, which totally got rid of the character being both human and Bullseye's dad, and instead went with some straight up Medusa looking weirdness. Prior Cashman goes fully into monster territory with this redesign, feeding off of people's memories and being able to alter them at his will. As a result of this, the Kingmaker is placed in confinement several miles underwater, in a secure facility where his powers can't be used. Or at least not in the way they have been before, as it is suggested that the villain has used his powers in order to create dictators and nightmarish leaders in the past. While it's perhaps a little over the top to make a character a demon snake god with mind powers in order to make them more interesting, it does also admittedly work. Number 4, the Carpenter. As one of Batman's most innocuous but also criminally overlooked villains, it's nothing short of a biblical miracle that the Carpenter managed to become both 3-dimensional and capable of winning at least one fight in her latest comic appearance. Against all conventional expectations, Batman Streets of Gotham manages to make a character who was actively mocked for being lame by the Batman himself into being low-key cool. When the Carpenter turns on the team of villains she is working with, she uses her previously mocked skills to create what is basically an R-rated version of Home Alone in the criminal's lair, which manages to take out every last one of them, and it's all the fun that such a description makes it sound. Half of it shouldn't be cool, like shooting a staple gun at someone or making a deadly animatronic crocodile, but yet, when you read through it, it totally is. She's no Batwoman, but for a couple of badass and unusual fight scenes, the Carpenter is the female woodworking John Wick we all dearly deserve. Number 3, Stilt Man. Stilt Man is actually kind of a badass is not a sentence that anyone would have expected to hear now or until the end of time. But it's also in no way a lie, as for legitimately one of the dorkiest dudes in comics ever, Wilbur Day has an entire redemption arc as his storyline progresses. Admittedly, said story begins with him retiring as Stilt Man, in the smartest move of the villain's life up until this point. Day then manages to form a genuine romance with fellow villain Princess Python, which would see the pair become married, and takes up a new job as a law enforcer for the government, making him infinitely more badass than he had ever been at any point prior. Although Stilt Man would be murdered by the Punisher when the two crossed paths, he would be cloned back to life during the events of Dead No More: The Clone Conspiracy, which means he also gets a sweet revival story to boot. Number 2, Captain Boomerang. Captain Boomerang is perhaps the defining turnaround story of a kind of silly supervillain who writers and artists managed to somehow make into a badass figure. Boomerang began his days as one of the many hilariously weird gimmick villains of the Silver Age of comics, with about the same level of respect as Paste Pot Pete in the villain world. But then, as time went on, Boomerang became a staple of the Flash's rogues gallery, arguably so they could keep doing wacky Boomerang moments, but this managed to give Boomerang enough time to become a legitimately fleshed out character. Nowadays, people don't even flinch at the appearance of Captain Boomerang, which is a real testament to how well the character has been used continually through his illustrious comic career. While there's still mention here and there of how dorky a Boomerang-themed villain is, it's only ever really done as a joke, which is pretty impressive all things considered. And number 1, Typeface. A villain whose gimmick is an ability to throw razor-sharp letters. You'd expect him to be doomed to both obscurity and general dorkiness for the rest of his comic career, sidelined with the likes of Condiment King and Kite Man for the rest of his time being featured in comics, even though I personally love both of them dearly. But every calendar man has his day, and Typeface sees his in a surprising turn to being a Punisher-esque badass, surprising everyone with his appearance in Spider-Man's Tangled Web after being presumed dead. The letter-based villain turned anti-hero even managed to get his own moment in Civil War, where he doesn't even die again, much to our collective delight. While a character called Typeface will never quite manage to be considered cool, the fact that he was made into something far greater than a one-note villain is undeniably awesome, and manages to make you surprisingly endeared to the character. Plus, he gets an arch enemy called Spellcheck, which apart from hitting pretty close to home for me personally, is pretty hard not to love.
Hello YouTube, we're turning things up to 11 with the launch of What Culture Music.
It's our brand new channel featuring all those lists you just can't get enough of, including creepy hidden messages in your favourite pop songs,
as well as radio-friendly songs that detail literal murder. That's as well as chatty faces where we get personal with you on our sordid musical tastes, in-depth discussion podcasts, and we're even doing quality fun stuff like tournaments and quizzes too.
There's going to be something for everybody, so come on over and make some sweet music with us.
Or just watch the videos, that works too.
Like, share and subscribe at the link below, and we will see you there.
Bye.
And that was our list. What harmless comic book villain do you think turned into a badass? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can find more of this sort of thing on whatculture.com, more of me on Twitter at HumanRuinsThings, and more of these dorks in the pages found in your local comic book store. Until next time though, bye!